Hey everyone, Rua here with a video I've been meaning to make for a while. Rather than go straight into another job guide, which is coming, I figured I'd put out a video containing some general gameplay advice. Some of what you see here you might already know depending on your experience, but hopefully there's something here you can get out of it. I've put some timestamps in this video's description if you want to pick out a select point, or if you just want to have a general look and see if there's something you want to see. Anyhow, let's go. First up is something you've seen in most of my guides, and I probably sound like a broken record at this point, but it really bears repeating. Make use of the Curio Mogs in the 3 nations to pick up status ailment removal medicines. Even if you have a solid healer in your group, they're not impervious to making mistakes or hesitating. To err is to be human. If they have a heavy workload on their hands, give them a hand and get your own ailments off. Remedies and panaceas are great for this, as they remove multiple ailments in one shot. I've come across this next one enough times to bring it up. When you first reach Reisenjima, you might find that some groups will want to fight Gea's Fate NMs at the number 9 Ingress. Here's the thing, number 9 isn't on the map, and therefore a lot of newer players might have no idea where it is. If you still don't know how to get there, here's how you do. You want to start from Ingress 5 and go down the river bearing south on your compass. If doing this at night time, you should be ready for aggro, or otherwise conceal yourself with Sneak and Invisible. Keep following the river south, and after a few minutes you'll find a mysterious ingress. Proceed through this and you'll end up at a pond. This is where Ingress 9 is. Ingress 9 is popular because there are 3 pop sites for NMs, and there is absolutely no aggro to get in your group's way. Macro layout is something that I went into during my White Mage guide, but I like to emphasize its importance again. Sometimes, circumstances in a battle can change quickly, and subsequently it pays to be able to respond quickly. This is why I have my bar spells on the same macro page, with the elemental bar spell on the control key, and the corresponding ailment bar spell on the same number, but allocated to the alt key. This way, I can hit the first spell and immediately follow with the proper second spell without having to scramble around for it, because I know it's there. I play Scholar in a similar manner. I try to allocate all of light and dark arts to a few pages all within easy access of each other. If I'm changing arts, I know that the spells and stratagems I'll generally be using are exactly where I need them to be. Mages are pretty dependent on good macros, and without them, I'm not sure what I'd do. Speaking of Scholar, here's a neat trick you should remember. Regen 5 carries into battlefields like Ambuscade and higher tier battlefields, so using it with a session and perpetuance before entering the instance can give your healer a greater margin for error. Simply cast it and then change back to your proper job. You will lose the regen effect, but everyone else in your group will keep it. If you have a Corsair in your group, then having them use Naturalist roll, that's the Geomancer dice if you're keeping score, will extend its duration even further. I've done this more than a few times whenever a healer has told me that they're a new player or otherwise uneasy about their level of skill playing a healer. Having such a strong regen effect helping them out has paid dividends, and I highly advise it. The player base could always use more healers, so doing whatever helps to alleviate the stress of the role is always a positive. This also works with Red Mage and Haste too, by the way. One of the takeaways from the Warrior Guide I hope people picked up on was to check what secondary weapons other melee jobs have, and whether they have uses. If you have a look at what weapons and weapon skills jobs can use beyond their primaries, you might be pleasantly surprised. Ninja has access to Tachia J-Harm whenever using a Great Katana to lower defense and speed up fights. Monk has Shell Crusher when using a staff to do the same thing, and both Dark Knight and Rune Fencer have Armor Break when using a Great Axe. I know that switching weapons like this is not always practical, but opening battles like this can help a lot, especially when you're low man and lacking major support. On a similar note, here's an important one. Be sure to quest all weapon skills you can use, even on secondary weapons. When you get to endgame, forming skill chains can be an important part of battle strategy, so having all possible skill chain properties available can be decisive. The mythic weapon skills quested via Nigel Isle are particularly important, as they tend to cover properties their respective weapon category would not usually have. Mandalic Stab opening up fusion for Thief instantly springs to mind, as does Insurgency for Dark Knight, to only name 2. If you're serious about being the best melee player you can possibly be, then you really should go out of your way to get all of these done. It might take a while, it might be tedious as well. Believe me, I've been through it a lot myself, but ultimately, it's worth it. A mistake I see some bards making is overcapping haste when it's really not necessary. On a march with Soul Voice can potentially reach 34% magic haste, meaning the haste spell from a sub-job will fully cap the category. Even under regular circumstances, you do not need to stack marches to cap the magic haste category. You really don't. Now, this is dependent on the bard having all the song plus JSE they can get to max out March, but with said JSE, Victory March caps at 28% magic haste, meaning that the 15% from the regular haste spell will fully cap the category at just over 43%. This becomes even easier with Marcato, which increases the next song's potency by 50%, so 28 multiplied by 1.5 gives you 42% haste, almost completely capping the category in one shot. There is a time and a place for overcapping haste. For example, you should be overcapping haste whenever something has a slow aura or repeatedly uses an AoE slow. Keeping with Bard for a moment, here's another thing that new players to the job really need to watch out for. Do not, under any circumstances whatsoever, ever take out instruments for fast cast pieces in the ranged or the ammo slot. Given how fast bard songs can cast, especially under Nightingale, you run the real risk of the instrument not swapping back in time if it's taken out as part of a pre-cast fast cast set. This will result in a significantly weaker song effect, and before you know it, your group is going to notice something is wrong. The animation for a song being sung without an instrument is also very distinct, so there's a pretty good chance veteran players will spot it and call it out. So save yourself the embarrassing scene and keep an instrument in your hands. The same thing applies to Geomancer. Some of you might remember that little rant I went on in my old Geomancer guide, but I still see it happening, so here we go again. That Dunner handbell should never leave a Geomancer's hand. Ever. Like with Bard, if the handbell is swapped out and not swapped back in time, then the following Geomancy spell will be severely weakened. This is potentially disastrous if an ability like Blaze of Glory is wasted on an inferior spell, so watch out for it. Again, as with Bard before it, the animation and sound of a Geomancy spell being cast without a handbell is very distinct, and yes, players will grill you for it. The Dunner even has fast cast and magic accuracy on it on its augment path, so there's literally no reason for it to ever leave that slot. Cap PDT, DT and other slots and save yourself an embarrassment. One final note on Geomancer before moving on. The same trick Bard has in fully capping magic haste also applies to Geomancer. When used with Entrust, Indie Haste caps out at just shy of 30%, meaning that the regular haste spell's 15% will cap out the category. This frees up the other 2 Geomancy slots for other effects. Only ever use Indie Haste as your main spell if your Entrust anchor dies and your party is suddenly undercapped and you don't have a bard. Here's another case of overcapping I sometimes see, but admittedly this one's pretty hard to nail down. This concerns the physical difference, or PDIF cap, how to meet it and when you might be going over it. PDIF determines player damage versus target defense, and there's quite a bit that influences it. Some parts of it you can't do too much to affect, like level correction, but you can affect the attack-defense ratio. The crux of my point is that piling on too many attack bonuses and defense down effects really has no benefit when the PDIF cap has already been met, at which point the new damage limit trait kicks in. Generally speaking, I see groups going way over the cap, but refusing to change some buffs out for other beneficial effects. Now, like I said, this is pretty hard to figure out unless you're good with math and have some concrete data on your target to work with, but here's how I go about gauging it. Groups for endgame. Let's just use Omen as an example. Tend to use Chaos Roll, Indie Fury, Geo Frailty, Minuets, and Honor March if it's available as some of their standard buffs. Factoring in abilities like Berserk and Last Resort, and this is blatantly going well overboard, Bolster Geo Frailty alone goes between 56 to 82% defense down depending on Idris or not. So that with Dia 2 means your target's defense is severely weakened right off the bat. This of course changes in content where Geomancer gets nerfed like in Dynamis, and in the new higher tier battlefields, but the principles still apply, since other effects can compensate for the drop. If you think you're overcapping PDIF, try a few runs where you swap out effects for others and see if things go better. You might be surprised. I've got a few things to say about TP sets, and I think they're quite important for new players to keep in mind. In my experience, there's no such thing as an ultimate TP set a player stays in no matter what the situation. Some sets built can come close, but it's important to have sets built around responding to situations and not be content with just one. You could have top of the range gear for damage output, but if you're being buried in ailments or taking massive damage with every other attack, it's not really the best set anymore. The point I'm making is, you need to switch to more defensive sets which retain valuable DPS stats when needs must. Don't just sit in one set and drown in ailments, or get smashed into the dirt. A perpetually enfeebled melee is a substantial DPS loss, while a knocked out melee is a total DPS loss. Take the hit to your overall damage and put the group first, especially if your healer is a novice. Not all jobs are on the Malignant set, but they can still use equipment to achieve the same ends. I went over this in the Warrior Guide, but it really applies to any job that reduces its defense to enhance its attacks. The role of a group's healer is to keep everyone alive and healthy, but this is still a two-way street, so coming to meet them at least part way could make the world of difference to them. Keeping on the topic of TP sets, something that even some of the best players miss is the fact that you don't necessarily need to fully cap equipment haste to also cap attack speed. Here's how it's broken down. The absolute cap of haste contributing to attack speed from all sources is 80%. A value that draws from three subcategories: equipment, magic, and job ability, each with their own respective caps. Equipment and job ability both cap at 25%, and let's just call magic at 43%. Magic haste is easy enough to cap as you've seen in this video, but if you have enough job ability haste, you can use some armor pieces which don't have a whole lot of haste on them, but do have very good melee stats, like the Odin armor and the Dagon breastplate. There's more than a few ways to get high amounts of job ability haste, and I'll show you them now. A Dragoon with a Samurai sub-job can maintain a 20% job ability haste value, meaning that with cap magic haste it only needs to find 17% from equipment to reach the total cap. It achieves this from Haste, and from its Wyvern being by its side. This is of course dependent on the Wyvern surviving, but as I'm on record saying, that's not really hard to achieve at this point. A Dark Knight fully caps job ability haste at 25% whenever Last Resort is active and if merits have been invested into desperate blows. With cap magic haste, it only needs 12% equipment haste to fully cap. This is very useful to know, because whenever Last Resort goes up, the Dark Knight takes a major hit to their defense, so putting on armor with more defensive stats becomes essential. The old adage persists, I'm afraid, as I've seen so many Dark Knights fail to recognize this penalty, only to watch on in dismay as they get utterly destroyed when they pull hate. Even during the brief window Last Resort is down, a Dark Knight can still maintain a 20% value from Hasso, and with the aftermath effect of the Apocalypse. Samurai itself gets Hasso with a base value of 10%, but this gets pushed to up to 19% with JSE pieces. Of these though, only one sees actual use, since with capped equipment and magic haste, a Samurai only needs to get Hasso to 12% to fully cap attack speed in a conventional set. Finally, Dancer can use Haste Amber to give everyone in its group a 10% job ability haste value, which is a great help for jobs like Thief, Blue Mage and Ninja, which lack native sources of job ability haste themselves. Better still, Haste Amber works across an alliance, so as long as the Dancer in one party has Haste Amber active, everyone engaged on the monster the dancer is on will also get the effect. For Monk and Puppet Master, martial arts can also be used to reach the attack speed cap, but it's not a very effective way of doing so. Martial arts reduces your base delay, so it's both a positive and a negative, since you'll be attacking faster with it, but if you overdo it, then you will really hurt your TP gain per hit, because you've lowered your base delay so much. Generally speaking, you should not be stacking martial arts equipment when at the attack speed cap. There is one exception to this I know of with the God Hands, but that's for another time. Ninja has a similar issue with dual wield, and I went over it in its guide. It's basically the same deal as Monk and martial arts, in that stacking dual wield gear lowers TP gain, so you should avoid using any of it when you're at the attack speed cap. This only applies to Ninja and Dancer though, since they get high enough tiers of the dual wield trait to really avoid using any dual wield gear, but others dual wielding will need to find their way to a 35% value. This should help uncertain players out. Something I'm fond of doing for jobs like Red Mage who often sub Ninja for damage output is to put 10% dual wield on their ambuscade cape they use for TP, as this roughly puts them at where they want to be. Thief and Blue Mage will need to get a bit creative to get to the safety zone, but it's certainly doable. Blue Mage can technically set enough spells to get a dual wield trait that matches Ninja and Dancer, but it's not really practical, as it's very heavy on valuable set points and spell slots. Blue Mage can instead better reach the target with some equipment adjustments and with some pieces which would usually find their way into a good TP build anyway. I'd like to take a divert from the game itself for a moment and talk about an external resource. The BG Wiki is a great source of information if a player ever finds themselves lost and in need of answers or intel. I mentioned during my White Mage guide that prior knowledge of what an impending battle could entail is a crucial part of the job, so the BG Wiki is a brilliant resource for that. This isn't just aimed at healers though. Players being bold enough to set up groups for content would do well to research on the BG Wiki ahead of time and see what they're up against. From there, they have something to go off of, and can then build a group suited to tackling the task at hand. My last tip for now is to explain how Treasure Hunter works, as there still seems to be some misunderstanding about it, even after all this time. Let's knock this one out of the park first. No, Treasure Hunter does not necessarily increase the chance of rare drops appearing when something has been defeated. Each monster in the game has a determined number of drop slots that items can appear in when they are defeated. Some are guaranteed, while some have a chance of appearing. What Treasure Hunter does is increase the chances of those unguaranteed slots unlocking and appearing. This means that even if you have a high Treasure Hunter level, that does not guarantee desired items will drop. Unfortunate, but it is what it is. Also, some drops from NMs share the same slot in their predetermined treasure pool. Either one item appears there, or a rarer one does, so no matter the Treasure Hunter level, the trait itself is not doing anything. Let's go through 3 examples to really nail this down. You just saw a Chloris battle where only one bud dropped. That means that despite Treasure Hunter, the slot for the second bud, which only has a chance of appearing, did not open. Here we have a King Behemoth battle. King Behemoth has among its drops the valuable Defending Ring, but the ring shares the same guaranteed drop slot as the less desired Pixie Earring. This means that no matter the amount of Treasure Hunter is going to increase the drop rate of the Defending Ring, because either it or the Pixie Earring are going to drop. Omen bosses work in the same way, with their sought after bodies sharing the same guaranteed drop slot as a second scale or other equipment. No amount of Treasure Hunter is going to help on their drop rates. OU is the exception to this rule, because it has 3 guaranteed drop slots like the other bosses, but it also has a 4th one which Treasure Hunter will work on. That wraps up this gameplay advice video. I'll be looking to get on with my other videos pretty soon, with the Bard job guide likely being my next feature beyond the version update. I'm also considering the idea of a video where I list the DPS jobs in tiers based on objective parameters. It'd be more than a bit controversial, and I'm still wondering if such a thing is even worth doing given how situational things can be. What do you think? Would that be a worthwhile video, or should I just give it a hard pass? Anyhow, I'll see you next time.